From Asia Society, Switzerland, this is State of Asia. My name is Remco Tanes. It's great to kick off another season today of original conversations with leading minds on what's happening in Asia and how it affects us all. And of course, over the next few months, we'll also bring you insights from some of the many events we organize here at Asia Society, Switzerland. For example, from the second live edition of our popular series of Oxford Debates, which takes place on April 8 in Zurich and revolves around the motion, Asia's rise will lead to a new world order. I guess we're not exactly shunning the big questions with that one. If you're in Zurich on April 8th, be sure to join us. More info and a link to buy tickets to this debate in the show notes. Today on State of Asia, we'll look at one of Asia's largest but most unknown countries that is getting itself ready to take up a more prominent place in the region, Mongolia. It's a vibrant democracy wedged between two of the world's largest authoritarian states, China and Russia. According to my guest, Hong Kong-based Asia correspondent and author Johan Nylander, Mongolia is gearing up to become Asia's next economic miracle. How it aims to achieve that while staying friendly with almost every country it deals with is the focus of his latest book, The Wolf Economy Awakens, Mongolia's Fight for Democracy and a Green and Digital Future, published by Hong Kong University Press. Johan Nylander, welcome to State of Asia.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be invited.
You're speaking with us from Hong Kong after quite a few travels, I think, to Mongolia, writing this book, The Wolf Economy Awakens. I noticed in your book you write about how Mongolia is a compelling story for any Asia watcher. Now, plenty of our audience here on the State of Asia podcast consists of Asia watchers. What makes Mongolia a compelling story to them?
Well, yeah, that's quite a big question. I think for a lot of Asia watchers, or for me as an Asia correspondent for Swedish and international media, I think often we focus on like China, India, North and South Korea, Japan, and Mongolia is right off the normal beat. It's right, like everybody is interested in the country. But often it's neglected, right? It doesn't get the attention that I think that it deserves. I've been writing about Mongolia on several occasions, but often it's been like indirectly about Mongolia. So, for example, how does Mongolia's mining industry gets affected from slowing demand from China? So, in summer 2022, I started going there more extensively. I started traveling there because there were some things about Mongolia I was very curious about. Something that makes Mongolia a bit different to many other countries here in the region. And one of the things I was most curious about is that how this small nation, landlocked between the world's two biggest authoritarian giants, like with Russia on one side, with China on the other side, manages relatively successfully to stand up for democracy and for democratic principles. It's a truly inspiring story, I must say. And I also think it's quite important for readers, for people in the West, in Europe and United States, because sometimes there's a feeling that people in Europe, people in the West are like, I don't want to exaggerate, but sometimes losing faith in the democratic system. They feel like the politicians don't represent me, I don't trust the institutions. That is quite dangerous, you must say, in these democratic societies. And that's why I think that the case of Mongolia, this small nation landlocked between Russia and China, still stands up for these democratic principles, is very, very important and inspiring story.
You speak of how it's inspiring that it's a democratic state wedged between these authoritarian giants, Russia and China. In your book, there's this quote from this 50-year-old man, which I found interesting. He says, if you speak to the prime minister, tell him we're ready for real democracy. We've been waiting for 30 years. So what did he mean by that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm happy you picked up on his quote. Actually, before my first interview with the prime minister, I asked a lot of people, like on the streets, in bars, in restaurants, like, what do you think I should ask him? And as in many other democratic systems, people didn't hold back in their criticism. And this 50-year-old man, like he was a bit upset. And what he meant by this was that, so Mongolia was under the thumb, it was a satellite state under the Soviet Union, indirectly controlled by Moscow for about 100 years. And then when the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Soviet Empire, Mongolia regained its freedom and its independence, right? And that happened about 30 years ago. So it's a young democracy, right? And it's not easy going from planned economy to market economy overnight. And from his perspective was like, okay, we have individual freedom, we have economical freedom, but we still have poverty, we have inequality, we have air pollution, we have a lot of negative things in society, and we need a more robust, a more transparent, a stronger democratic society going forward. And this is something I hear from a lot of people. Like, yeah, we got our independence and it's been 30 years of progress, but we need to do better. And I hear this not just from the government, from most everybody that I speak to. So that was a frustration in that man's comments.
Mongolia is estimated to be sitting on subsoil riches worth anywhere from 1 to 3 trillion US dollars. You point out in the book that's enough to make every one of the 3.3 million Mongolians a millionaire potentially. But as this man has said, and as you've seen on the streets there, nearly 1 in 3 live in poverty. The GDP per capita has kind of been stuck at about 4,000 US dollars over the last decade, while the overall economy is growing due to these mining riches that we'll get back to later. I've read in your book that people are concerned about unemployment, the lack of healthcare. What explains this seeming contradiction then of this quicker growing economy now with a stagnant poverty level? And is the government able to address that? We have elections coming up, of course, in 3 months in Mongolia.
Yes, there's election coming up. It's quite exciting. I mean, this is very important. And yeah, Mongolia is, potentially one of the richest countries in the world, but all the riches are underground, right? Mongolia has tons of copper, oil, gold, silver, rare earth metals.
All things that go into our mobile phones, our new energy grids, etc.
Exactly. Like, so copper is a key product for green transitions, rare earth metals, naturally for mobile phones, but they are stuck underground. And we had a mining boom in Mongolia about 10, 15 years ago. Right, it was the world's fastest growing economy. Like 1/4, the economy grew about 20%. It was one of the world's fastest growing economies. Right, I remember this story from The Economist saying that like everybody in Mongolia are going to become, dirty rich. But that didn't happen. Right, the mining boom came to an end. The party ended, and not enough of the money had been reinvested into future generations. Right. The ground was dug up and sold to China with too much political infighting, too much corruption, and not enough money reinvested into future generations and new projects. And this means that even if the economy is growing, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is reaching the people in the country. What is important is not just economical growth, is that it leads to social mobility, right? That you can lift people out of poverty into a middle class. And the country actually failed miserably by lifting people into a middle class. So even if the economy like more than tenfolded over the last 25, 30 years, the number of people stuck in poverty is the same. So that is a great failure. And this is something that like both the ruling party in the country is trying to address. This is something that the opposition parties are trying to address. And going back to that quote from that 50-year-old man, like we need stronger democracy, more transparency, improve the system so more people can be lifted up into a middle-class society.
Last summer, I ran into the Mongolian band The Who at a festival in Belgium. They were performing in front of at least 10,000 people. They've had success touring all over Europe, North America, currently Australia. They describe their music as combining traditional Mongolian throat singing and instruments like the jaw harp, the horsehead fiddle, with screaming guitars we know from heavy metal. That concert I saw last summer was indeed mind if not ear-blowing. But I was wondering, you spoke with some of the band members in Ulaanbaatar, in the capital of Mongolia. What kind of ambassadors are they for their country, you think?
Oh, The Who. Well, you see, I can put on the vinyl album if you want, right? We can listen instead of talking. No, I think.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we run into copyright issues.
I think like after mining and the livestock, I think The Who is probably the biggest export success ever from Mongolia. But no, yeah, I was lucky. I was in this jazz club, the Fat Cat Jazz Club in downtown Ulaanbaatar, like maybe one of the best jazz clubs I've been to like in my whole life. And there one night I met some of the guys from The Who, and we spoke about this like Mongolian identity. Right, this is something that's also very close to the heart of many people in Mongolia when you speak to them. How you have like international influences, but you still like cherish and value deeply your local traditions. And so the Who, as you said, like it's a metal band, like a folk metal band, but with strong connection to the nomadic traditions, to the old nomadic Mongolian culture, right? So you have all these instruments that you won't see in any other country than in Mongolia. And this screaming you refer to, like it's throat singing, and it's absolutely, it's amazing. It's one of the best bands I've ever heard. And I think if you want to understand Mongolian identity, go to its music. Like I think the Who is one of the best example of international influences, but you never let go of your local traditions, right? And this is super important for people in Mongolia. They are strongly connected to their roots.
There's another sound from Mongolia I came across after reading your book, and that was the sizzling of meat on giant barbecues, the frying of hundreds of onions, tons of fruit and vegetables that happens daily in the kitchen of the Oyu mine in the south of Mongolia. It's one of the world's largest copper gold mines. It has over 6,000 miners who need to be fed every day. And just how this massive kitchen does that is the subject of a film on YouTube that's been by now watched over 7.6 million times. It's quite a zen experience to watch, I thought, because there's no voiceover or commentary. It's just these sounds of tons of vegetables and fruits and meats being prepared. But more to the point, that mine, that Oyu mine, it's crucial for Mongolia's future, isn't it? And you visited. What can you tell me about it? How does it feel when you're walking around there?
Oh, it's a mind-blowing experience. I mean, the Oyu copper mine in the Gobi Desert, in quite close to the Chinese border. The reason I wrote about the canteen, like with 6,000, it's the biggest canteen in the whole country, right? The biggest restaurant in the country. 6,000 people being fed every day. And I mentioned the canteen just to try to explain the sheer size of the mine, right? And it's important to the whole country's economy. I mean, when you stand in this copper mine and you look out over this like moon-like stony landscape, it's really hard to get your head around it. I mean, the sheer size of it is, the area is bigger than Manhattan, right? I know you are in Zurich now. Like the size of the Oyu copper mine is almost as big as all of Zurich, and 1 kilometer deep. So when you stand there, it's easy to realize like how important this mine is for the country's economy, right? It accounts for some 4 or 5% of the whole economy, this one single mine, and also how important it is for producing copper that is used for batteries and for a green transition. Naturally, the second thing that is very striking when you stand there is the environmental impact. Even if this mine is being hailed as one of the world's most like sustainable mine, it's like state-of-the-art engineering, you also you can't help but being taken back by witnessing how this deep cuts into the flesh of nature, right? So it's, you see how important it is for the economy, and you can't like not worry about the environmental impact of, but it is huge. It's mind-blowingly big.
And you mentioned its importance for the whole economy of Mongolia. That also makes it vulnerable, of course, the Mongolian economy, if it's so dependent on just one single mine, even though it has potentially much more subsoil riches that haven't been discovered yet. I heard an interview with the Mongolian ambassador to Singapore the other day, who says that only 15% of the country so far has been explored for what's underground. So they've got ways to go. But on the other hand, it makes the country vulnerable to be so dependent on commodities like that. Is it trying to diversify its economy in other ways?
Yes, diversifying the economy is very important. Again, you saw the last mining boom 10, 15 years ago when they dig up the earth and sell it to China. There's no value added in that. So the whole, if your whole economy is based on selling some resources like copper, gold, oil, your whole GDP will also fluctuate with the price of copper. You know, copper price goes up, everybody happy. Copper price goes down, everybody being pressed down into poverty. That's naturally not a good business model, not for a company, not for a country. So what the country is trying to do now is to diversify the economy, and they're trying to do this in two ways. One is within mining, because it is a mining-based economy. So you dig where you stand, right? Is to increase in the value chain within mining. So to do more added value production in the country. At the moment, they are investing in refineries. So they are producing oil today, and the crude oil is being exported to other countries, and they refine it, and then Mongolia import the refined product back. That's not a very good business model. So instead, they want to refine the oil in the country and then export it, like becoming a net exporter. They have copper smelters, they have gold washing plants. So there are a lot of investments now, like mega projects, like multi-billion projects, how to scale up in the value chain, more value added. And this is very important. And the other one is to diversify into other industries, right? Not just be dependent on mining, but all kinds of other industries. And this is very much what my book is about, how to try to scale up in the technology sector. There's a thriving, very fascinating tech startup scene. So a lot of especially younger people that don't want to work in mining, they want to work in something more international, right? So tech startup. You have lifestyle brands like fashion brands, skincare brands, jewelry brands that are connecting with the nomadic herders. You have tourism, you have filmmaking, for example. So both diversify in mining, but also diversify in other kinds of industries.
I mean, many countries say, oh, we're just going to create our version of Silicon Valley, and that will help us through the 21st century at least. But reading just the numbers in your book, it seems Mongolia is actually onto something. The country has been rising quickly in international rankings on innovation. I saw that 50,000 IT graduates a year on a population of 3.3 million. That's extraordinary. And also it scored 11th in the International Math Olympiad ahead of Finland and Norway, and up from the 50th place only 14, 15 years ago. Is that deliberate policy by the Mongolian government? Is the education system completely geared to getting people into this IT sector and make that a successful export product as well for the country?
Yeah, I think the push into technology and digitalization is a quite new thing, right? It hasn't been around for a long time, but it's really gaining ground. There's a quick, fast digitalization of the nation. And I mean, in terms of scoring high in mathematics, that's something you see in the whole region, right? They put a lot of emphasis on engineering, mathematics, coding, like more than in Europe and America. And that's something you see in like here in Hong Kong, Singapore, China, and Japan. So it kind of follows an Asian trend, I would say, which is I really think that Europe should take inspiration from. But now you see a lot of fascinating technology companies coming out of Mongolia who are addressing local problems that can have international wings, like they can be exported to other countries. And you see this in green technology, like climate tech. So yeah, I think it's a lot of fascinating things. Like I have been covering the technology sector in Hong Kong, in Shenzhen, Ho Chi Minh City, Jakarta, Seoul, Tokyo. And Ulaanbaatar is one of those places that actually inspires me, that I find fascinating.
You write about it in the book, seeing nomadic herders just living in these far stretches of land, of empty land, but now all of a sudden being able to use drones or to just use their smartphone to access government services. How did that impact these nomads themselves? How did they feel about that?
Oh, is a very good question. And how the modern technology, digitalization is affecting this traditional way of life. I mean, you can look at it from both sides, right? I mean, we all know how great and damaging modern technology can be. You know, how overwhelmed we can be with these notifications and scrolling on the Instagram feeds, right? And there's a calm quietness being out in the countryside, not having access to this. But I think that's also a bit of a tourist dream. I think the experience I had when I spoke to the herders, to the nomads, is that it simplifies life for them tremendously. You have this like e-Mongolian app, for example, where you can apply for a new passport, apply for a driving license. You can do your tax filings, everything in one app. Like there's no equivalent in Sweden or other European countries whatever I know about. You can one app for everything connected to government. You can see like herders riding on a horse or a camel, sitting with their mobile phones and actually doing government e-services. And this makes life easier for them. Also, if you don't have access to international information, you don't know what the price is for different things. Right, so you have to trust agents. For example, if you want to sell milk, you want to sell meat, you want to sell this and that. Like now, they can know what is the current spot price, so they are closer to international markets. So they say by using this technology, it makes it easier for them to maintain the traditional lifestyle. And modern technology brings them closer to the traditional nomadic lifestyle, and that's quite inspiring. Again, like I have like a full chapter just about this in the book, and I think it's my favorite part of the book actually.
I also noticed the green technology, like the solar powered heating devices that they use in the yurts. And this one family you visited, and the mother of the family said, "Well, now we don't have to argue about each morning about who has to get up earlier to fire up the coal, etc. We can just switch on this solar panel thing, and the tent gets warm." It was a really good example, I thought, of the impact of this new technology.
Yeah, that is one of my, again, I think that was also a very interesting story. It's this Mongolian company called Eureka, and they are helping people in the most poor part of Ulaanbaatar to change from, because in the winter it gets down to minus 40 degrees Celsius, right? So they burn coal to heat their homes. And this company, they are helping them to transition from coal to solar panels. That naturally comes with a cost. So what they are doing, which is key to this, is that they are connecting this transition from burning coal to solar panel with carbon credit systems. So the family can take advantage of this carbon credit system and make money, right? And they can make almost as much as one person's minimum wage per year. So it's almost like having one more person working for the household. So they make quite good money from it, from the carbon credits. And also, as you said, they don't have to breathe this toxic air, and the family, they don't have to fight in the morning whose turn is it to go up and get your hands black and dirty from burning coal. And I think this is one of those Mongolian solutions that could have impact globally also.
We touched upon it briefly at the beginning of our conversation, how Mongolia is this democratic state wedged between China and Russia. And I was wondering, it has, of course, economic ties with Russia and China. It has this economic corridor with both countries that involves rail, roads, electric grid, pipelines. So it has every interest not to offend either one of the countries. At the same time, it's getting a lot of attention from the West recently. Last year, we saw the presidents of France and Poland visit Mongolia, even the Pope visiting the 1,500 registered Catholics in the country. Earlier this year, the German president hopped over. How is Mongolia positioning itself on this geopolitical stage that, especially in the region it's in, is changing so quickly?
Mongolia's diplomatic relationship with the world is quite unique. Because Mongolia, they have very good diplomatic and business connection both with Russia and with China, right? And naturally they don't really have a choice because they're landlocked between these two countries. But they also have very good diplomatic connections with United States, Europe, Japan, South Korea, India, and this is called the third neighbor policy, right? So you have Russia, China, and your third neighbor, which is the rest of the world, often the democratic part of the world. And this unique position, I mean, some people call Mongolia the Switzerland of Asia. It has this neutrality. People from Russia, people from China and Japan and United States, they can meet in Mongolia. There's something called like the Ulaanbaatar dialogue. So people from all these countries, they can come to Mongolia and debate security and economy in the region. And actually now when there's so much tensions in the world, right? You have the tension between Russia and the EU, China and United States, all the war in the Middle East. There's so much tension in the world now, and I think that Mongolia could potentially play a role as a mediator. And Mongolia have done this before. I mean, one good example is that North Korea and Japan, they don't have any official diplomatic relationships. But lower level diplomats from North Korea and from Japan, they can come to Ulaanbaatar and unofficially discuss these like burning issues. Again, when Donald Trump, when he met with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un, Ulaanbaatar was shortlisted as one of the places they would meet. The meeting, in the end, it happened in Singapore, and people say maybe because they have better golf courses. I think Mongolia, they have a unique diplomatic position, and I think this could be used. The Mongolian government should probably press harder to try to be a mediator now when the world is facing so many difficulties.
Is one of the ways Mongolia is keeping its direct neighbors and its third neighbors happy by just involving them as well in giant mega projects in the country. India is building the first oil refinery or financing the first oil refinery in Mongolia. You have Russia building pipelines, I believe. You have China building a hydro dam. At the same time, not too long ago, 2-3 years ago, the country Mongolia concluded its first free trade agreement with Japan. It really seems to be able to get the best from every side.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, they have to be careful, Mongolia, not to upset its closest neighbor, closest trade partners. But I don't know. It's something like people just like Mongolia, right? I mean, United States former Secretary of State John Kerry visited Mongolia and called it an oasis of democracy. You speak with like the World Bank and United Nations and like ambassadors from different countries, and they speak so warmly about this country. It's something with the country and its political approach that it's just likable, and also there's huge business opportunities, like untapped business opportunities. So strong diplomatic relationships and huge business opportunities. It's a quite good combination to make friends.
You write in your book how the country is applauded by many diplomats, trade envoys, development bankers, investors. I was wondering, how do you convince just a European tourist who feels like going to Asia for the annual holiday to skip Thailand for once and go to Ulaanbaatar?
Well, if you like -40, Ulaanbaatar is the place to be.
All right.
No, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to compare Thailand with Mongolia, but Mongolia, it is one of the most beautiful countries I've been to in my life. It's probably the friendliest, most welcoming people I've ever met. And I mean, downtown Ulaanbaatar is a proper modern international city. You know, nightclubs, jazz bars, international restaurants. But the real adventure, it starts when you leave the capital and go out on the countryside. When you take a jeep with a driver out on the steplands, I mean, there are no roads. Like you basically drive just through the grassland. Wherever you drive, you see this like wild horses running free. You see cattle, yaks. Right, it's absolutely fantastic. And you can drive up to most any yurt, these nomadic families, and they will welcome you in. Maybe you bring a bottle of vodka or some pencils and books for the kids, but they will welcome you in, and you can stay the night. It's I don't want it to sound like a cliche, but it's very much an inner travel. It is extraordinarily beautiful. And I remember waking up when I stayed with the herders, right? And you wake up early in the morning when the sun is just rising on the steplands, and you realize what they mean with like the endless blue sky. Like the world seems so big and so simple and so beautiful, and it's really a tremendously beautiful adventure going to Mongolia. Just do it. You will never regret it.
Your book is called The Wolf Economy Awakens. Where does that term come from?
You heard the expression, the tiger economies, like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore. But in Mongolia, it's not a tiger country, right? It's a wolf country. Like the wolf is considered like almost a holy animal, like a spirit. And it's a rougher kind of economy, like mining and herding, right? So they started to call it the wolf economy. And now, like you had this 30 years, and now what's going to happen the next 30 years, right? And I think it's the wolf economy is going to awaken. Like we're going to see a tremendous amount of investments and business opportunities here. That is what the wolf economy comes from.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Johan. The book is The Wolf Economy Awakens. More info on the site and great photos as well, wolfeconomy.asia. Thanks again for this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. And I'll see you in Mongolia, okay?
Yeah, in the summer is fine, okay?
In the summer, okay.
All right.
All right.
Once again, I'm joined by my colleagues Serena Jung and Nico Luxinger. And I had to check, for a little under $800, gets you to Mongolia over Easter from Zurich. So I was considering maybe just going.
I think that's too early for me, given the temperatures currently. I'll wait until summer, but I really want to go.
I checked summer as well, also $800. So pretty good deals. But other than that, how did Mongolia appeal to you, Nico?
Well, I was intrigued both by the music export, which you already seem to know, but then I also did watch this video of the largest canteen in Mongolia, which I can highly recommend to everybody. It's very soothing and very relaxing, and I would not mind eating there. But more to the point, one thing that crossed my mind is that in this description of Mongolia being an awakening economy, right? That's the title of the book. And the question that left me with as well, but it sounded like that was the story already 15 years ago, right? So is it maybe also a bit of a case of an economy that's always, sort of on the verge of awakening, but then never really does? I found it very interesting to learn about the country. My interest in geopolitics, of course, meant that I was most fascinated with the third neighbor policy, which seems like an interesting concept for a country like Mongolia.
And maybe to add, because of the 15 years frame, I remember that there were a few cultural things back then on shamanism and mining and herders. So That was my reference frame before going into the podcast.
Well, to follow up on that third neighbor policy, I found it fascinating to learn that the country succeeds in involving all these countries that it's surrounded by, from India to Japan to China to Russia, in investing in these mega projects within the country without them biting each other. He described, I'd never heard that, Mongolia as the Switzerland of Asia in that aspect, like a non-threatening, neutral country. And I was thinking, well, it's also the country from where Genghis Khan created the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen, from the Sea of Japan to Eastern Europe. But that aside, I think I do understand what you meant, Nico. Like 10, 15 years ago, this was the story, and why would it happen now? I got the impression that they really have their hopes set on this mine that is now finally starting to be productive and starting to earn the money instead of just having to invest in getting the stuff out of there.
I mean, one interesting question here is also to which extent those two aspects that you discussed on the podcast are related. The awakening of the economy and the diversification and sort of development, and Mongolia's apparent ability to have good relations with a number of countries. And it reminds me of something that we've come across so many times, in the course of our work and this podcast, which is that as the great powers, the superpowers of the world start to fight more and be more in conflict, it actually opens up a lot of strategic space for what, for lack of a better term, we call middle powers, although that's a very diverse category in itself, right? And you see this with other countries. You see it with Vietnam. They call this, I think, the 360-degree foreign policy or whatever. So there's all these countries who have their own versions of wanting not to choose and of multi-alignment, because they see that they can now have relationships with different courts. Nobody can or wants them to force them to pick a side. And I think that's interesting, right? And that does present actually an opportunity that can have positive effects economically, because then other countries, for maybe even geopolitical reasons, will want to put investment into the country. So I see that opportunity. I've just become recently a bit more skeptical of how long-lived the third neighbor 360-degree policies can be, because my fear is that even if nobody makes you choose one side, can you really play all sides forever?
But then again, I find it really astounding that they can do that, given their position between Russia and China. And it seems like they have a lot more maneuvering space than, for example, countries in Central Asia. But then I also listened back to a Closer Look episode on Mongolia. I think one of the interesting facts there was that when the Soviet Union collapsed, one of the countries helping transition Mongolia into a democracy, which they really created on their own, was Japan. When their relations really shifted from maybe more eastern parts of Europe to really East Asia.
Maybe to be a bit more hopeful that they might succeed this time around as opposed to 15 years ago is the number of returnees he also spoke to, like who came back from the US, from Europe, had high-paying jobs there at consultancies, banks, and now decide to work for a lot less for the government of Mongolia or set up their own firm in Mongolia. Apparently they're seeing something change as well, that it gives them the reason to return home and start building their future there.
All these things always come down mostly on policy, right? There's nothing that would make the awakening or developing of the Mongolian economy inevitable, but there's also nothing out there that would inevitably doom it. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to smart government policies, and the fact that well-educated, high-paid people are willing to come back and work on that is definitely an incredibly good sign. And if they can keep that up, and if they can be sort of this haven of not just democracy, but also good governance, sort of in between two countries where both dimensions are maybe fraught with some issues, then that's good. But I also think this position of being a landlocked country with borders of two giants must be tricky and will probably always come with great challenges.
That's all for this episode of State of Asia. More info on Johan's book, The Wolf Economy Awakens, on his website, wolfeconomy.asia. And of course, a link is in the show notes. We'll be back in early April with a condensed version of the second Oxford debate live on the motion Asia's rise will lead to a new world order. To get the full experience of that debate, be sure to join us at Kraftwerk in Zurich on April 8th. More info and a link to buy tickets in the show notes and on our website, asiasociety.org/Switzerland. That's where you'll also find information on the many other events and activities we organize, as well as a link to sign up for our weekly newsletter, how to become a member, and other ways to support us. For now, my name is Remco Tanis. Thanks for listening.